We live in a society in which increasingly, I think, more and more people do not believe that there is a God. And if you were to ask them, why do you not believe there's a God? Most of them would probably say something like, well, there's no evidence that God exists. There are no good reasons to think that there is a God. They'll say things like, belief in God is blind faith. It's something that you believe because you want it to be true. It's an emotional comfort blanket for people who who don't have the mental fortitude, I suppose, to face up to the fact that we're going to die. And there's no higher force, there's no higher purpose to our existence. And if you say to them, well, have you considered the Bible? Most of them will probably reject it out of hand. They'll say, well, that was written by primitive people who tried to explain the way the world around them worked, but now science explains how the world works, so we don't need to read the Bible, and they won't even look at it. So all of the things the Bible says about God, you cannot get people even to read, because they automatically switch off the moment you put it in front of them. But I believe there are good reasons to believe that God exists, that do not require you to already be a Christian, do not require you to already believe the Bible is the inspired word of God, just require you to think logically, rationally, sensibly about some of the things that we see around us in the world. So I'm going to present 3 reasons to you, and here they are. Why does the universe exist, or why does anything exist? Why does something exist instead of nothing? Why is there life on Earth? And where do right and wrong come from? How do we know what we should do and what we shouldn't do as men and women? So the first argument, why does the universe exist? The philosophers call this the cosmological argument. And in its simplest form, it looks like this. It's a standard logical format, 2 initial premises, which if they are both true, the conclusion follows logically. So the first premise, everything with a beginning has a cause. Second premise, the universe had a beginning. If those 2 are true, it follows logically the universe had a cause. Now, premise number 1, everything with a beginning has a cause, seems to me that this is fairly obviously true. If you think about all of the things that you see, that you have, that you interact with on a daily basis, things that have a beginning had something that caused them to come into existence. So we had a beginning when we were born, or when we were conceived, if you like. The clothes that we wear, our houses, our cars, all the things that we own, they had a beginning. All the things we see around us in the world, animals, plants, trees, and so on, all of them have a beginning, all of them had a cause, something that came before them that provided the material, provided the instructions, I suppose, for the way that they were that they came together. I can't think of anything that falls outside of this premise. Of course, you speak to me afterwards if you can think of something that has a beginning but did not have a cause. Now, the second point, the universe had a beginning. This is an interesting one because I think in the first part of the 20th century, a lot of people believed the universe was eternal. The universe had no beginning, and therefore there was no need for any God to come before it to create it. But since the middle part of the 20th century and onwards, we have discovered there are very good scientific reasons to believe that the universe had a beginning, that there was a point in the past, which scientists refer to as the Big Bang, when everything that exists in the universe had a beginning, including space, including time, including matter and energy, and that before that point, none of these things existed. So if these 2 premises are true, then we can conclude logically that the universe has a cause. The universe, everything that exists, all of the planets, the stars, the galaxies, all of the people, all of the matter, all of the energy that exists anywhere in the universe had a cause. There was something that caused it to come into existence. Now, what can we say about the cause of the universe if that's true? If something caused the universe, obviously it doesn't exist inside the universe. It has to be outside of it, not part of it, to have created it. If space and time themselves, space, time, matter, and energy came into existence at this beginning point, when the universe came into existence, then the thing that is the cause is not subject to space and time, so it doesn't exist in 3-dimensional space. It doesn't change as time goes on. It's not made up of matter, it's not made up of energy, it's not subject to the natural physical laws that we understand as governing things that are made of matter and energy. And something which is conscious and intelligent. This one's a little trickier to get our heads around, but something that is not subject to space and time, something that is changeless, something that does not change as time goes on, something that is not subject to any laws, that doesn't have to obey any preconditions. For something like that to do something which it had not done before, that is create the universe, it has to be something which can make a conscious, intelligent choice. So obviously these are all properties that we would associate with God as he's revealed in the Bible. He's not part of the creation, he is the creator. He's timeless, he's spaceless, he's not subject to the natural physical laws because he created them, and he is a conscious and intelligent being. Now, you can present this argument to an atheist, and one of their favourite responses you will get is, okay, well, if everything that has a beginning has a cause, and the universe has a cause, and that cause is God, then, well, God must have a cause as well. So what's the cause of God? And they think you've got you because you can't answer that question. But, and the typical Christian response to that will be, well, God didn't have a cause because he didn't have a beginning. God is a beginningless entity. He is what ancient philosophers called the first cause, the unmoved mover. He is eternal, he had no beginning, he had no cause, he has always been there. And the atheists will reply, well, that's just special pleading. You're just making that up. You're making up this exception for God, so he doesn't have to be subject to this rule, so you can get out of answering my question. But that doesn't really help them, because when you ask the question, what came before the universe, then you either have to, well, you have two options. You can either posit an entity which has no beginning, such as God, a first cause, an unmoved mover, something which nothing came before, nothing caused, which did not need a cause. Or you have a sequence of events with no beginning. So the universe was caused by God, and then God was caused by something else, and then that thing was caused by something else, and then that thing was caused by something else, and you go back and back and back and back infinitely. Everything it was preceded by something else, and you never, ever, ever reach a beginning point. That's what's known as the infinite regress, which is considered by philosophers to be a logical impossibility. And the reason there's a line of dominoes there is because if you imagine coming in here on a Sunday morning and there's a line of dominoes just stretching from here down the middle of the room and then out that door and through there, and this line of dominoes is in the process of falling over, would you conclude that either somebody got here really early, set up a line of dominoes for some reason, went through there and started it going, or would you believe that the sequence of dominoes has no beginning? It's just an eternal line of dominoes that stretches out there and then further out into the street and then down the road, down the A1 or whatever. And there's no beginning to this line of dominoes. And nobody started it off because it has no beginning, but somehow it managed to start falling over. I ask you which is more rational. I'll go for somebody being through there who's actually set it up and kicked it all off. And I apply the same principle to the creation of the universe. There has to be somebody there who has started it, who has created everything, who has started it all off and has started it going. And those are the two options. I can't think of any others. So that's the first question, the cosmological argument. Why does the universe exist? The universe must have a cause, and you don't have to already believe in God in order to conclude that the cause must have certain properties that would normally be associated with the God of the Bible. So let's move on to the second question. Why is there life on Earth? This is what philosophers call the teleological argument, and I'm going to split it into two parts. Why is there life? Why does life exist at all? And why is it on Earth? Why is it that Earth can support life? Now, in the olden days, people would, the Christians, I suppose, would say, well, there is no explanation for the existence of life other than God, therefore how can you possibly not believe in God? And then, of course, Charles Darwin came along and said, Darwin and other scientists came up with the idea of evolution, that all species that exist today descended from a common ancestor or a set of common ancestors via genetic mutation and natural selection. So in every perhaps not every generation, but at some point a creature will mutate, and this mutation will give it some sort of advantage over all of the other creatures that are around. It will do better at breeding and reproducing, its offspring will have this mutation, and so over time the entire species will change to have this mutation. And then this is extrapolated to say, well, that's what happened throughout billions of years from the earliest single-celled life forms to life that we have today. So there's a completely naturalistic explanation. There's no need for God anywhere in the equation. That only explains how the earliest single-celled life forms could possibly have changed into the life forms that we see today. It doesn't explain how life came to be in the first place, how life came from non-life, and it doesn't explain how life gained the ability to reproduce, because obviously you cannot evolve if you cannot reproduce, pass on your beneficial mutations to the next generation. Obviously, biologists are aware of this. They wouldn't claim that evolution does explain that, but there are things that are still to be discovered, things that are still to be explained. Atheists cannot simply hold up evolution and say that it disproves God. I don't think there's a great deal of benefit in engaging in long and heated arguments about evidence for or against evolution. I really don't think it's that relevant in terms of the question of, is there a God, is there not a God? But why is there life on Earth? Why is it that the Earth has this appearance, we might say, of being fine-tuned for life? There are scientists, not just Christian scientists, atheist, agnostic scientists, have also concluded that there are certain parameters, certain constants, certain properties that the Earth has and the universe itself has that appear to be fine-tuned for the existence of life. The values they have are just the right values in order for life to exist. If these values were to be changed even a tiny, tiny bit, either one way or the other, then it wouldn't be possible for life to exist. Things like, for example, the distance between the Earth and the Sun is just right, that the Earth is not too hot if it was any closer, and it's not too cold if it was any further away. The distance between the Earth and the Moon is just right for the tidal system to work in the way that it does, and the whole Earth's ecosystem depends on the tidal system working in the way that it does. If we were any closer to the Moon's gravity would be too strong. If we were any further away from the Moon's gravity on the tides would be too weak, and the Earth's ecosystem wouldn't work in the way that it does. And the angle and the rate of Earth's rotation around the Sun are what governs the seasons that we rely on in order for farming and agriculture to work. If they were any different, we might be in a situation where every point on Earth would either be blazing hot all the time or freezing cold all the time. There'd be no seasons, you couldn't grow any food. Or the seasonal changes would be too extreme. So instead of having 3 months of summer and then autumn and then winter and then spring, you might have, a week of blazing hot sun and then a week of freezing cold winter, repeated over and over again. And again, the agricultural system wouldn't work. On the grander scale, the universe itself, there are other scientific constants that have the appearance of being fine-tuned, being just the right value in order for life to exist. Things like the strong and weak nuclear forces that hold together the nucleus of an atom, the gravitational force which determines how objects with a certain mass will attract objects of a smaller mass towards them. That's what makes the Earth rotate around the Sun, for example. The electromagnetic force is what governs the electrons, which spin around the nucleus of an atom. If these things were any different, if the constants that control the innards of the atom were any different, we wouldn't have elements, we wouldn't have a periodic table. We might only have hydrogen, one neutron, one proton, one electron. There might be nothing in the universe other than hydrogen. It wouldn't be possible for planets, for galaxies, for stars to exist. It wouldn't be possible for any creatures to exist. And the rate of the universe's expansion. At the moment of the explosion of the singularity and the Big Bang, the universe expanded outwards at a certain rate and is still expanding. If that expansion were any slower, then it would be like blowing up a balloon but not putting enough air in, and it would just collapse in on itself again. If the rate of the universe's expansion is too fast, it would simply expand like that, and there'd be no time for any stars or any galaxies or planets to have formed. And there are others as well. These are just a few examples. If the values of these quantities were even the slightest bit changed in one direction or the other, there simply wouldn't be any life anywhere in the universe. And so, many people conclude it makes sense to say that somebody must be responsible for setting it up in this way. Somebody must have set, fine-tuned these parameters at the beginning of the universe's existence, at the point of the Big Bang. And obviously, we would argue that God was the one who's responsible for that. What happens if you present this argument to an atheist? Well, one of their favourite responses will be the multiverse. What is the multiverse? Well, it's the idea that our universe is not the only universe that exists. There may be other universes out there which are all different from ours, which may have slightly different set of values for each of these constants. So in one universe, the Earth might be slightly further away from the Sun, so there's no life there. In another universe, the nuclear forces might be different, so the atoms cannot hold together, and there's nothing in that universe other than hydrogen. And so, if every universe has a slightly different set of values, then there's got to be one somewhere that has them just right. It's like playing the lottery. Everybody buys a ticket. Almost everybody doesn't win, but obviously because there's one winning ticket, somebody has to win. So there has to be one universe where there is life. And ours just happens to be that universe. How lucky we are. But there are a number of problems with that, because there's no evidence that a multiverse exists. It's an idea, it's a model. People put it together to say, well, if this is true, then we have an explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned, why it is the way it is. We don't need God. But there's no observable evidence to say that the multiverse does actually exist. It's just an idea. And it doesn't really even solve the problem, because then you've got to explain, instead of why is there one universe with these certain quantities and parameters, where did all these other universes come from, and what is it that decides that they all have to be slightly different, and what is it that sets up this system where at least one of them has to have the right values? There's no explanation for that. You want to talk about blind faith? Well, that is blind faith. There is no reason to believe that this exists, but people will posit it simply as an alternative to the existence of a supernatural creator. So that's the second argument, the teleological argument. Why do the universe and the earth have this appearance of having been fine-tuned by an intelligent designer? Third argument, the moral argument. Why does morality exist? How do we know what's right and wrong? Is anything right and wrong? When we want to determine where our system of morals comes from, because everybody has some system of morality, everybody believes that certain things are right, certain things are wrong, then there are certain ways that we can decide how the system of morality works. It can be either objective, which means it's determined by something other than us. It's not determined by human opinions. There is something out there that is true, regardless of whether human beings believe it or not, regardless of whether human beings exist or not. It is objective. Or it can be subjective, which means it is determined by human beings. Human beings decide what is right and wrong, agree on it, but it's only true if somebody believes it, and it's only true if there are human beings who are actually there to come up with it and believe it. If there were no human beings, there wouldn't be any right and wrong. So it can be objective or it can be subjective. It can be absolute, which means there is one single moral code that applies equally to everybody, and everybody has to adhere to, whether they like it or not. Or it can be relative, so everybody has their own individual moral code. So I have mine, Ken has his, Andrew has his, and so on. So which of those works the best? And if we did have such a system of morality, where would it come from? Who would decide what it was? And who would have the power to enforce it? Well, I think we can get rid of relative morality straight off the bat, because nobody actually lives as if morality is relative. They might say that it is. They might say, well, it's just something you create for yourself, and everybody else creates for themselves, and you cannot say that you're right, and they cannot say that they're right. We just have to live with each other. But if that were really true, and if we actually lived like that, then nothing would ever be universally right or wrong. It would just be my opinion against your opinion. If you didn't like my opinion, tough. If I didn't like yours, tough. You could never judge me, I could never judge you. We couldn't have a justice system, we couldn't have any police, we couldn't have any courts, because it would simply be people's opinions. You can justify anything you like by saying, well, it's my opinion. that this is right. You know, I could waltz over to Mark and steal his car keys and drive off in his car, and he'd say, excuse me, my car, my keys. And I would say, well, not under my system of morality, they're mine. And then the only way to decide who it actually belonged to would be just to have a fight. And he'd probably win because he's much tougher than me. And then whoever won would get the car. But that's how it would work. And it would simply be chaos, anarchy. It would simply be survival of the fittest. You know, might would make right. The strongest would decide what happens, and everybody else would just have to put up with it or die. So I think we can get rid of relative morality. Even if people say they believe it, nobody would ever actually live like that. It wouldn't work. Ultimately, we all believe that there is an absolute morality, that morality is absolute. You know, if it's wrong for me to murder somebody, it's wrong for all of you to murder somebody. If it's wrong for me to be a racist, it's wrong for all of you to be a racist as well. If that's true, then where does it come from? Who says it's wrong to murder people? Who says it's wrong to be racist? Why should we listen to what they say? So here you can present that to an atheist, and they'll say, well, where does your morality come from? They might say, well, it's the moral consensus. Human societies have evolved from being lower primates to higher primates, and as we've come along, we've developed the sense of morality. So we have a society, we have a sense of morality that lets a society survive and function and cooperate together. Simply the process of socio-biological spin-offs of the evolutionary process. So, you have a society with a majority of people believe it's wrong to murder somebody, then it's wrong to murder somebody, and you don't do it, and if you do it, that society will punish you. Obviously, that's subjective because that's determined by human society, and if there is no human society, there's no rule against it. It will work some of the time, but it won't work in a situation where the society supports something that's clearly morally wrong, and Adolf Hitler's there because he largely responsible for creating a society where the moral consensus believed things and did things that were clearly morally wrong. In Nazi Germany, it was considered to be right to promote the interests of the Aryan race at the expense of the Jews, the homosexuals, the gypsies, the disabled, and so on. If history had worked out differently, if Hitler had won the Second World War and conquered this country, and we were all still living under Nazi ideology, we'd probably all believe that the interests of the Aryan race came first at the expense of everybody else, and that it's okay to put Jews in concentration camps and exterminate them, and so on. Is that morally right? Well, of course it's not. It's clearly morally wrong, but you can create a society that believes it's okay to do it. And therefore, you cannot rely on the moral consensus of a society to tell you what is right and wrong. It'll work some of the time, but sometimes it won't work, and we've seen that from history. And some people say, well, human flourishing, human happiness, whatever makes that happen is good, and whatever causes human suffering and human detriment is bad. Because what makes people happy and what makes people flourish are not necessarily the same thing. To use a trivial example, I could eat a whole bar of chocolate. Wouldn't make me flourish, but it would make me very happy. You could send me to the gym for 2 hours, make me very unhappy, but it would make me flourish. Which should I choose? Which takes priority, my happiness or my flourishing? Or to put it another way, which comes happier? Which comes first, my happiness or your flourishing? If I have the choice between something that makes me happy and something that makes all of you flourish, which do I choose? Which do I go with? So sometimes you have to choose between what makes one group of people happy or flourish and what makes another group of people. How do you decide? How do you decide who gets priority? And again, it doesn't work all the time because there are some situations where you can do something that will make someone happy, but it's clearly wrong, or you can do something that will help the human race flourish, but again, it's morally wrong. For example, euthanasia. Getting rid of people once they're too old or too disabled or too ill to provide anything useful to society, so you get rid of them to benefit it, so there's more to go around for everybody else. Would it make the human race flourish as a species? Probably. Would it be morally wrong? Of course it would, and that's why we don't do it. Or eugenics, the idea that only people who have who tick certain criteria in terms of health, in terms of stability, in terms of wealth, ability to provide, only they should be allowed to have children. People who are not physically healthy, people who are poor, people who are not very clever, we won't let them breed because they'll produce inferior offspring. And the human race will be better if we let the stronger people breed. Would that help the human race as a species? Possibly. Would it be morally wrong? I think, of course, it would. And that's why we don't do it. So again, what makes people happy and what causes the human race to flourish? You cannot get a consistent set of morality out of that, and there will always be situations where it simply doesn't work. So if it's not subjective, if we cannot rely on ourselves to come up with a consistent set of morals that will be fair to everybody and will always work in every situation, the only alternative is an objective source, something that's not created by human beings, something that comes to us from a higher level. And there's no viable source that I know of other than a supernatural being who is higher than us, who is wiser than us, who understands what is right and wrong better than we do. And of course, we. So, 3 reasons why I believe in God. Cosmological argument. The fact that the universe exists, scientists have concluded it had a beginning, therefore it must have had a cause. There are certain conclusions we can make about that cause, and they all match what we would consider to be properties that God has. The teleological argument. The universe and the world have certain scientific constants and parameters that govern the way they work, that have the appearance of being fine-tuned for the existence of life. And again, that points to the activity of God, the way we would expect God to operate, to create the universe and create the world. And the moral argument. So we've seen that relative morality doesn't work. Subjective morality cannot provide a consistent set of right and wrong values that works in all circumstances. And so I think the best answer to all 3 of those arguments is that there is a God. There is a supernatural being who is eternal, who exists outside the universe, who created the universe, who set it up for the existence of life, and has given a set of moral commandments, principles for that life, intelligent life at least, to adhere to. Now, notice I've said a God, a superior being, a supernatural creator. I haven't said who it is. The next step would be to explain, well, if the best explanation for these arguments is the existence of a supernatural intelligence with certain qualities, then who is it? And how can we find out more about them? And that would be part 2, which I'm not going to do today, which I'll do next time if you decide to have me back. Reasons why I believe that all of those things are best answered by the existence of Yahweh, the God of the Bible, the God worshipped by the Christians and the Jews. So, thank you very much.